folks, my name is Tom Devine. I'm the legal director of the Government Accountability Project. GAP is a whistleblower support organization. So we're lawyers, so I guess better define the terms. People that we help are citizens who use free speech rights to challenge abuses of power that betray the public trust. That's the folks that we serve. We help them in 4 ways: defending them against retaliation, helping them to make a difference, and stronger free speech laws to protect them, and sharing our lessons learned. Over the last 45 years, I've been honored to help 8,000 whistleblowers. Many changed the course of history. But I can't think of any greater honor than introducing Scott today. Scott Smith, I don't even really think of him as a human being. I think of him as a phenomenon for the truth. Scott, go for it.
Thank you, Tom. I'd like to start by thanking Leslie Pacey, who reached out to me from Government Accountability Project in the support of their legal team. I probably wouldn't be standing here if it weren't for them. I'd also like to thank my scientific team. Now, I am the chosen one on the front lines to take all the full frontal assault from the EPA, the railroad, and the smear and the tax, and even some of the residents from the community that want to play both sides, which is not in the best interest of East Palestine. And to address that, the scientists on my team actually worked for Patel, and they wrote some of the ASTM dioxin standards. I can't reveal their names, but I will say one name. On March 29th, I got a phone call from Don and said, dioxins are the real issue. I want to support you. And I want to tell you about the great team around me. I don't make a statement. I don't do a PowerPoint without them saying it. Don is battling cancer. But I believe in giving credit where credit is due, even if I'm going to get in trouble. I won't use his last name. He calls me nonstop. His passion. I wouldn't be able to do this without him. He is literally calls me from having chemotherapy. But, and this team around me is phenomenal. I have an expression, you leave your ego at the door. That would serve a lot of other people well. If you leave your ego at the door, it's just a great, great thing. Also want to, with everything going on, there's a lot of great nonprofits, net-tax exempt organizations, but I also want to say that I want to challenge today some of these nonprofits to fund testing. I've done all I can do. I'm trying to do it. And all these plaintiffs' attorneys, there's one attorney, Bill DeBroff, who reached out to me. I want to thank him. He's actually funding resident test results. And if your attorney is not giving you your results or being transparent or helping you test, my suggestion is you need to start asking questions. So with that being said, how do you turn off the middle thing?
We're just trying something. Go ahead.
Why am I here still today? And since I get constantly accused of making things up and lying, so my mother is still alive. It was her birthday yesterday, in fact. So if anybody wants to check out this story, they can. But why am I here? Some people are just born this way. I don't remember this, but I was 4 years old, and that's me. And I was a ring bearer in the wedding, and they were worried about me losing the ring. And I refused to be in the wedding because they didn't trust me, I'm told, unless they gave me the real ring. So they gave me the real ring. So the point is, I was born stubborn. It cost me a lot of money. I planned to come here twice. Now it's 22 trips and 26 rounds of testing. So be it. I will not stop. So a week ago on Friday, I remember the time. It was 5:40 p.m. and I had received an email from Leslie Pacey, who received an email from Ashley McCollum. And It was a link to buried documents on the EPA website that they never talked about publicly or transparently, but it's there. And that's, that tells the story. So we're gonna go through a timeline. So February 3rd, first event, which you've seen. February 6th, second event. February 17th, it turns out Norfolk Southern, along with the full knowledge of the EPA, was testing for dioxins near Ground Zero, with detailed testing reports that showed high levels of dioxin TEQ samples, 91.9. And that's key for the other chemicals in the fingerprints too. February 17th, I receive a direct Twitter X message from Courtney Miller. Can you come out here and help us test? I came out what I thought would be 2 trips. February 22nd, I arrive in East Palestine for the first time and I begin testing in and around Sulphur Run. February 22nd, and these are active links for those that want the presentation, a contractor comes out of the woods when I'm testing Sulphur Run. And you're just gonna see a video. You saw part of it in the documentary, you'll see another video of it. So I think I now know why, because they were testing on February 17th and all of a sudden they see this guy in Sulphur Run in waders and pulling water and sediment samples. This is from FOIA documents either received by Leslie Pacey or what was in that link that we got from Ashley. And this is February 14th. EPA supervisor writes, he acknowledged, meaning Norfolk Southern, they would need to address the remaining contamination in their remediation plan in the future. So just tells a story. That's the source email. Now, everyone says the EPA gives directives to Norfolk Southern. Well, here you have Jackie Cole of Region 5 and Robert Wood of Norfolk Southern. So Norfolk Southern instructs the EPA and other agencies to coordinate with Norfolk Southern and not the Norfolk Southern contractors. Now, I think we've all heard a far different narrative from the EPA in the media. And this is interesting because the EPA is looking for containment locations that we will be following up in more detail with the Government Accountability Project. Now, there is a dioxin expert at the EPA, Brian Gullett. He's never allowed to talk to the media. This comes from an internal EPA email from FOIA. There may be residual dioxin in the ash residues, but I suspect most of what may have been formed was dispersed throughout the area in the plume. We have the ability to sample these plumes using our drone-mounted sampler, but it's too late now, of course. Now, here's where we're going to get into it. Just think about, in my offer, I will go on record again today. I will sit down with Mark Durno, Norfolk Southern, for the benefit of the community. No hard feelings. I can take all the smears and defamation as long as there is a positive outcome for this East Palestine community. So Brian Gullett, the dioxin expert, said even if it rained, it'd be extremely unlikely that they'd be in the soil 6 inches deep. Why is this important? You'll see this. April 20th last year, you see Mark Durno stand up and all these samples getting averaged. So on March 10th, I received the first testing results from Eurofins, confirming elevated levels of dioxins and sulfur run sediment and presence in the water. March 10th, what we know now, we didn't know until January 25th of 2024, the EPA received the testing results back from their dioxin testing. So March 17th, I'm interviewed by Will Kane on the Fox News channel. That's why it's important for this timeline, especially with any media in the room and the media not in the room that is listening to these smears and these false narratives from Norfolk Southern and EPA. March 20th, EPA's Barbara McCree, we still don't even know if she's a real person, multimedia communications at EPA, wrote an email looking for my personal information. Here it is. There's the email, Barbara McCree.
Wow.
And I was told like 3 public information officers were watching, but here's 52 people at the EPA watching every move I make now. If I don't know what I'm doing or anything, I don't know what they're so concerned with, but they're reporting in my locations, whereabouts. March 20th, Mark Durno at the EPA in an internal email appears to begin the nothing to see here narrative. That's after the Fox News thing. That's after they have the results with the 91.9 composite sample TEQ. And the expert team around me, we've been talking about a potential third event, which is the remediation of most of the toxic burn pits after the EPA appears to stop all dioxin testing. We've got test results that suggest that dioxins and other chemicals may have continued to spread with the excavation of the burn pits. Now, May 2nd is the first News Nation story with Rich McHugh. I want to say, I hope ABC, NBC, and Time Magazine are listening, because Rich McHugh, News Nation, and Chris Cuomo are setting the standard. Whatever's going on at these other networks, the other networks aren't really telling the truth. And Rich McHugh, News Nation, Chris Cuomo, and that whole network, I forget everyone else, I don't want to be, are absolutely telling the truth. They're fair, they're representing both sides. So this community owes a big round of thanks for News Nation, again, or I may not be here, along with many other people trying to help. See, here's the Mark Durno email. Here's the dioxin reference for background soils. We'll forget about it, but love. Oh, it's the Office of Research and Development. So I think my lawyers tell me there are no coincidences. That's why this timeline is very important. The question is, will any media really cover the timeline, beyond News Nation? July 24th through 27th, Marilyn Figley informed, on July 27th, I wrote an email. So Marilyn Figley, who you may have seen on the news, we did the garlic crop testing, which we'll talk about next, tried to set up a meeting. I went to one meeting with Norfolk where we were going to sit down and agree with our detailed test reports, methods, everything, in reciprocity. The railroad, Norfolk Southern, and the EPA said, no, we only want to see Scott Smith's details. We're not sharing any details. And I put this in writing. Please understand this is a response to this entire email chain. I remain willing to have an open dialogue and collaboration with Norfolk Southern and or the EPA and or any Norfolk Southern contractors and or anyone involved in the Unified Command Center, but it will be on equal terms with information shared in both directions. And that July 27th email is public. I think it's on the Government Accountability Project website that's available for all to see. Again, Mark Durno has lied about this. September 25th, Chris Cuomo, News Nation, hosts a town hall with residents. October 4th, EPA concludes no further dioxin tested needing in East Palestine. October 19th, in my driveway, I get served with a lengthy subpoena asking me for all my communications with residents, all my testing, all my communications with media, everything else. Total violation of my constitutional rights. Thank God for Government Accountability Project and my personal attorney. We stood up to them. I said, bring it on, file a motion to compel. They still haven't done that. But this timeline, I would love to get cameras in the courtroom and face this. And I may not have enough time to get into it, but plaintiffs' attorneys, Jake Koza and my personal attorney, without talking to each other, said, this is strange. These plaintiffs' attorneys in the class action might be trying to get results. And I'm going to be very clear. I'm not in the business of enriching these class action attorneys. They can reimburse me for my costs. I'm not making money like all these other consultants, and I will put that money back into the community to do more testing. And then on November 25th, the roll of the dice comes out from Huffington Post in Christy Angelo, and then that leads to a bunch of censorship, which you see on the Government Accountability website. So now the EPA, the latest narrative with the EPA as this gets out from the press release from Government Accountability Project is that was on-site testing on February 17th and February 9th. And, you know, we were only talking about off-site. Well, that is a comedy show because on-site, everything is connected. Taggart Street, where Brushville Hardware Supply, East Martin, that's all on-site because the plume fallout deposited everywhere. So off-site, in our definition, is where the toxic plume fallout was not. And we went with the experts on my team. There's a little sliver just outside, not far from East Palestine, on Beaver Circle in Columbiana. And the dioxin background there was 1.7 parts per trillion TEQ. Now, these are the FOIA documents from Norfolk Southern. I'm going to go fast through these, but same reports, same lab I use. And that is the chain of custody. They started on February 9th. And they tested water here. So they found vinyl chloride at 290 parts per billion in the water. This community is very smart. You can Google this and look at that. But these are like baseline fingerprint contamination settings. So I want to show you this. So these are the dioxin testing from February 17th. Now, think about on ABC and all the smears coming at me from Mark Durno. Composite testing. The best analogy to this, so composite, they have all these samples of dioxin soil, of testing for dioxin in soil, but they instructed the lab to blend 5 samples together and take a reading. They didn't put out the TEQ. The TEQ was 91.9. So what I did is so this is equivalent, let's say, you know, I get pulled over on a suspected DUI. This is my blood. And picture this, if you're Norfolk Southern, the police officer would say, oh, I'm sorry, you can do your own blood testing. So I call up 4 of my friends that haven't had any drinking, and I take all this stuff and I pour it together and I mix it up. That's a composite sample. And Mark Durna and the EPA, they want to question my methods. I'm going to give a direct challenge to Alex Prescia of ABC. Why don't you cover this? Time Magazine will get to them. Why don't you cover this? So the dioxin TEQ is 91.9, and this is the fingerprint, you know, what we call the fingerprint that I've learned from my scientific team. And I'm just going to go, so here's the chain of custody from February 21st, benzene 55 parts per million, which is 55,000 parts per billion, vinyl chloride. So this lays everything out. And I am not aware of this ever being talked about or addressed by Mark Durna. And don't buy the on-site, off-site stuff, because the whole town is on-site. Anywhere that plume deposited is on-site. The only thing off-site are the control samples, where the plume was not. So this is behind Courtney Miller's house. This is on February 22nd. Well, little did I know, now I know. And oh, by the way, Norfolk Southern and the EPA have accused me of making up this video. And again, Mark Durno, EPA, Norfolk Southern, I'll make the video available. It's not, I didn't have an actress do this. That's how desperate they are. You're on private property here.
I'm sorry, I'm just asking you if you're taking samples.
I'm not, just like you refer me to your public information officer, have you taken samples?
I can't answer any of your questions.
You can't. Well, then why should I answer any of your questions? Because of what?
We need to know who's coming and going on the site.
But this is private property.
Come here.
You're standing on private property right now.
I'm sorry, but I need to know.
I'll have to check with my public information officer. You're on private property.
I'm sorry.
The landowner doesn't want you trespassing. So now it took to January 24th, 2024, thanks to Ashley McCollum. I know why they came out of the woods like that. It was really weird because they already knew that they were testing for dioxins. It's right there on the timeline. And then in May, we tested, and this is after, so in February 22nd, the TEQ was 18 in the sediment of the creek. In May 23rd, it increased to 65. This is why me and the scientific team said, Scott, this third event, the remediation, is going up. And we still have a lot more testing results coming in, to come in. So, and this is the same version in a bar graph. So it's significantly increased after the remediation, but the EPA stopped all dioxin testing on April 18th, and then remediation cranked up after April 18th. And these are just pellets. The vinyl PVC pellets in soil for VOCs, they tested all of it. And it's all butyl benzene phthalate, butyl acrylate. So you can see this narrative again. These are all, once they knew what they had, it's the chemicals in your home. You're to blame, residents, for your health symptoms. And, benzene, butyl acrylate, 60 parts per million. Benzene is a very concerning chemical, and I hear scientists all the time say there is no safe level of benzene. This goes on and on and on, so I'm just going to scroll through this, but you can see it's over and over again, and these are all the lab tests that were buried on the EPA website. Now here is a video from Mark Durno this is from April 20th.
The modeling also told us that we would not expect to see high concentration of dioxin compounds, which is the compound that most people have indicated to us that they're concerned about. The primary contaminant that we're looking for are semi-volatile organics, which are common products we see from a burn. Dioxin, we wouldn't expect to see that, but there was enough interest in that particular chemical that we added that to our soil sampling list. Then there's the dioxins. Again, we sampled for dioxins because you told your elected officials we want this compound tested for. So we added it to our analyte list. Now, as far as railroad goes, the lab they're using is called Eurofins. They're a very highly reputable lab in the U.S., so I'm not concerned about their choice of laboratories. We're also using a reputable lab. We're using PACE, right? Labs out of Pittsburgh and Minneapolis. So yeah, the laboratory quality is high. So again, you can't have enough data to make decisions with. Sir.
In this area here, a lot of people grow gardens and things like that. What's your recommendation?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because that was actually one of the talking points. I never said anything. Our recommendation is to continue using your properties the way you normally would. We actually just had a meeting with the garden club, one of the garden clubs in the area, Tuesday night, and we had an expert come in, a phytoremediation expert. Phytoremediation is using plants to clean up chemicals. He told us that the chemicals that we're dealing with, if they were a problem, do not readily uptake into those plants. So even if you had a problem, he doesn't believe that you should not garden or farm. Okay, that was his piece of advice. Our recommendation to date, because of the analysis that we did, the modeling and analysis that we did, and how we understand the chemistry of the vinyl chloride burn, we don't believe that there was enough dioxin concentration in that smoke to create a problem, okay? The back calculation we did, it gets to another question one of you guys asked about the model. We back calculate, we didn't, I think you asked, we did the modeling for the one car the night before the vent and burn. We did an event reconstruction model several weeks later to look back at what the 5-car burn did, plus the observations from our guys on the ground, plus the wind patterns that we looked at from the various sources.
So did you hear Mark Durno say you can never have enough data? And I've offered to meet with him. Did you hear that, Time Magazine? Did you hear that, Alex Pressure at ABC? Did you hear that at CBS, Roxanne Saberi and Natalie Needs? Did you hear that? You might want to cover that. And then here's an example of my reports, same Eurofins. So he talks about Eurofins, but did you hear Mark Durno? This is an agency that has $12 billion and 17,000 employees, and they're relying on models, and they knew about testing from February 9th and February 17th. Think about that. Think about that. Now, Time Magazine, Time Magazine, the residents' quotes were great in the community, but here is an example of the undue influence and the media just blindly putting the EPA on a pedestal. So there's a picture, and actually that's not even a lab report, that's an EPA spreadsheet table. If there was a picture of me doing that, I'd be crucified. And this is right out of the Time Magazine article that came out on February 2nd. Durno's working 16 to 18-hour days to hear this. And I'm gonna officially say, because I tell it like it is, shame on Time Magazine for mistrust of the government, this largely conservative community. Shame on them. This is not about politics. That's implying that. So Time Magazine needs to be called out. And this is a video that's 3 minutes long, but this was the Society of Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry, where me and the scientific team gave a presentation. They didn't know we were there, but they talk about misinformation and disinformation. And at the end, they're asked a question about crop testing. And we relied on our partners. They never tested any crops in East Palestine. They relied on models. And Leslie, this plant expert that the EPA references, we need to find out everything about him. We need to FOIA, what is he paid, and the one that showed up at the community meeting. So Mark Durno says you can't do enough testing, but we're going to do our models. It's okay to eat your crop and eat your garden produce. So here it is. We just released this last week, and Kelly Kennedy also has done a great job with local media from out of Cleveland. So Marilyn Figley's TEQ dioxin in garlic is 440. The control sample, which came from Tamerlyn Fries from a year ago, was 0.81, and her garlic from her garden was 4.5, which is 54,000%. Now, we need more testing. But this is preliminary data, more testing needs to be done. This is better than nothing, and I would like to do a lot more crop testing. And Marilyn Figley's lawyer from the class action refused to turn over results. I get my results to residents as fast as I can. So these plaintiff class action attorneys not giving over results, that I don't know what's up with that. I mean, there are theories out there that they're gonna jam down a settlement. All I can say recently, one of my businesses was in a class action. It resolved to a data breach. The lawyers got $5 million in legal fees. Guess what I got? I just got my check for $750.
Oh my God.
And, well, I'm almost done now. The 63 East Palestine dioxin soil samples so far. So we look at greater than 3 parts per trillion TEQ. 70%. The regional screening level, sometimes residential screening level, is 4.8 ppt. You hear Mark Durant talk about that. So 46% are over that. Now think about this logic. My methods, my quality, 54%, the majority of my samples are good news, nothing to see here in the soil. And we've identified some hot zones. So if I'm using dirty shovels and trying to manipulate all this data it just doesn't make sense. And I got news. I was with the O'Connells last week. The EPA, what did the EPA tell you, Lori?
Harsh soil's fine.
But they also said they wouldn't test your soil because it's close to a roadway?
Yeah.
Yeah, right to the roadway. The soil I tested with 3 parts per trillion, it was under the screening level. That's good news. So, I'm actually, in a weird, ironic way, I'm almost limiting the liability of the railroad, but I'm identifying the hot zones. So they're trying to smear me. They're in a weird, ironic way. They're kind of attacking data they don't want to attack. And then the control sample from Beaver Circle, Columbiana, the TEQ was 1.7. And these are our latest February 1st results. So again, the Norfolk Arcadis 91.9. Just remember this composite sampling. This is blended mixture. So more likely than not, there were much higher dioxin results. So there you see a summary of our various results with initials. So the regional screening level, you see, from 379% more to Brushville Hardware Supply at 39,000. So more testing is needed. And this going back to the control samples in Bull Creek, where the plume was not for water, baseline dioxin testing, and then we had sulfur run. And we have a few more slides here. When it gets to furnace filters, particle sizes, the human eye can only see, I think it's something like 40 microns. And these you're talking about as low as 2.5. And why this is important, Christy Angelo from Huffington Post originally exposed some of this, but Brian Gullett is a key scientist at the EPA. Why can't anyone talk to him? But this is from a paper he has characterizing emissions and burning plastics. The particulates emitted were 2.5 microns or less. Respiral nature of the dioxins, it shows what you can breathe in. And this is very important here because these MERV filters, you never get a perfect seal. So what I am testing in furnace filters, it's better than nothing. It's what you're not feeling well, you may have been exposed to. The residue I'm identifying is probably 10 to 50, most 80 to 90% flowed right through. Now, this is my last slide, but I also want to say, whoever the resident was that was on Fox Business News with Maria Bartiromo, I apparently used my name. I got a phone call from Lisa and Stephen Hilbert out of Indianapolis, and they immediately called up and paid about $8,000 of lab testing. So get more. So if you're on Facebook, you see Lisa Hilbert, please reach out to her and thank them. Again, you got. I don't know where all these other tax-exempt organizations, nonprofits are. Government Accountability Project is putting money into this, and I want to say, I want to give a chance. Every passing minute is a chance to turn it all around. Norfolk Southern, no, I'm not. I got thick skin. Mark Durno, let's still sit down on behalf of the community. I'm going to give you the chance to turn it all around. And Pastor Joe Sheely, I ask you tomorrow, don't pray for me. Pray for the whistleblowers that I know want to come out. Pray for Mark Durno. Pray for Norfolk Southern, and pray that they can find it in their hearts to do the right thing and sit down and have a full exchange of data. And with that being said, people know I don't always follow the exact rules. So Rick Schade originally called me. I didn't know he was the railroad, sat down and interviewed me. And I'm going to end with this. East Palestine represents everything that's great about the country and everything that needs to be fixed. And all these great people, I thank you because you motivated me. You gave me hope that this country can be fixed. And I want to say, Rick Schade, I don't get into politics or political endorsements. I am fully endorsing Rick Schade. I'm endorsing his character to change. I don't care what he runs on or what. And his story is the American dream with his father and how he came over here. I really can't thank Rick Schade enough for being able to work with him, and it's an honor to know him. And I brought him a little gift because I want to make, after he's elected, the congressman in the blue shirt. So, and it's a great community. So anyway, Rick is scheduled to speak. So now I want to take the opportunity to introduce Mike Schade. Again, Unity Council is not here, so I was asked to send. So I think the speakers, Mike Schade and Steve Lester, is just two of the top-notch people, and Mike Schade has a great organization.
Great, thank you. Thank you. The mic might help just a little bit. That's going to be hard to follow. So for those of you that may not know me or Toxic Free Future, just a little bit of background first. We are a national nonprofit organization that has been working for 40 years to protect U.S. residents, American families from exposure to dangerous chemicals like dioxins, vinyl chloride, PFAS, phthalates, and many others. We've had the honor and the pleasure of working with grassroots leaders here in East Palestine. Over the last year, we've done a lot of work with the Unity Council. We've done a lot of work with River Valley Organizing in the early days. And one of the first things that we did was to work with other NGOs. We organized a national sign-on letter to EPA last winter calling on EPA to do a much better job in testing for dioxins. We were very concerned about the draft dioxins sampling plan that they had released. I'm not going to go into that. I know Stephen Lester is going to be speaking about some of the concerns with dioxin testing, but I just want to note that we've been working very hard to push EPA to expand their sampling, not only for dioxins, but also chemicals of concern in vapor intrusion and indoor air, because we know there's been not enough indoor testing in people's homes, particularly those that live near Sulphur Creek, that may be impacted by vapor intrusion. But my talk is going to be a little different here today, which is really to highlight how East Palestine is really a symptom of a much bigger problem. Unfortunately, our nation's federal chemical regulatory system allows companies like Oxy Vinyls to produce cancer-causing chemicals that we know can be harmful to public health. So in today's presentation, I'm going to be talking about how other communities across the United States, such in places like Louisiana and Texas and Kentucky, today are continuing to be exposed to chemicals like vinyl chloride. And I'm also going to be talking about new research that we just published this week, revealing the ongoing risk of shipping vinyl chloride by rail, which happens day in and day out across the country, through Ohio and other communities across the United States. Let me see if I can figure out how to work this thing. Is there a certain button I need to, oh. Sorry, I'm not super tech savvy. Oh. Thank you. Excellent. So, as I mentioned, in the months following the train derailment, we not only were pushing for dioxin sampling, but we also wanted to take a moment to highlight how other communities around the U.S. were being impacted by both the production and the disposal of vinyl chloride and PVC plastic. One of the things that was really interesting to us was that we were seeing states like Texas saying, we don't want the toxic waste from East Palestine to be disposed here. Meanwhile, if you look at data from the US EPA, you will see that Texas is home to more vinyl chloride production facilities and incinerators that burn toxic waste from the plastics industry than almost anywhere else in the country. So we put this report out in April, which is available on our website for free at toxicfreefuture.org, to highlight how other communities across the US are suffering from the production of vinyl chloride and also the disposal, Because as Scott noted, when you burn plastic in incinerators, dangerous toxins can be released. And we've known this for decades. We've known this going back to Love Canal and even going back to the Vietnam War. So a couple quick factoids in our research in this report that we put out back in April. We found that across the country there are 19 plants around the country that produce either vinyl chloride or PVC plastic. For those of you that may not be familiar, the number one use of vinyl chloride is to make PVC vinyl plastic. So you can't make PVC plastic without vinyl chloride. So across the US, there are 19 factories that produce either vinyl chloride or PVC plastic. Most of these facilities are located in the Gulf South, in places like Louisiana and Texas, but there are other facilities as well in places like Kentucky, Illinois, New Jersey, Niagara Falls, Canada. Across the board, the chemical industry produces between, this is according to the US EPA, between 10 and 20 billion pounds of vinyl chloride every single year. Let me say that again. The chemical industry produces between 10 and 20 billion pounds of vinyl chloride every year. So if you think about that, who is being impacted that? Absolutely, East Palestine has been severely impacted by the disaster from last year. But at the same time, today, communities around the US are suffering from exposure to the very same chemicals. Our research found that on average, plastics plants in the United States release over 400,000 pounds of vinyl chloride into the air on an annual basis. And you can bet that, unfortunately, that most of these communities are not rich white communities. Most of these communities are lower income communities, communities of color. So this is a major issue of environmental justice and racism. This here is a picture of Formosa Plastics plant in Point Comfort, Texas, which is actually one of the biggest polluters of vinyl chloride in the United States. There's actually been a shrimper woman named Diane Wilson who's been watchdogging this plant for about 30 years. She started getting involved in this facility because she was a shrimper and she was discovering that a lot of the shrimp that she and other fisher folks were trying to harvest, after this company was discharging their toxic waste into the water, many of the shrimp started dying. So in an act of civil disobedience, she actually tried to sink her boat in the bay to prevent the discharge of toxic chemicals. And she wrote a really fantastic book, which I recommend checking out, called An Unreasonable Woman. She's an example of a grassroots leader in Texas who's been fighting against vinyl chloride as well as dioxins going back to the 1990s. This here is just a quick snapshot to show who are the biggest polluters of vinyl chloride in the United States. Of course, the company who was shipping vinyl chloride that derailed in East Palestine last year was Oxyvinyls. Oxyvinyls is the #1 producer of vinyl chloride in the United States, and that's according to their own information. But they're not the only company that produces vinyl chloride and releases vinyl chloride in the U.S. Some of the other biggest producers include Westlake Chemical, Formosa Plastics, Shintech, and Orbia. And this is relevant, which you'll see in a couple of minutes now. Westlake Chemical, they released more than 185,000 pounds of vinyl chloride in 2021, according to data that they reported to the US EPA. Their biggest plant is in Kentucky, in Calvert City, Kentucky, and this past Monday, the US EPA, I know we all don't love the EPA, but the EPA published a report this Monday that found that people that live in the community downwind of this plant in Kentucky face an elevated risk of developing cancer because they live in the community downwind of this plant in Kentucky. And one of the reasons they face elevated cancer risk is because of both ethylene dichloride and vinyl chloride. Ethylene dichloride is the chemical that's used to make vinyl chloride. They even found a greater cancer risk for children who attend an elementary school in the town right near this Westlake chemical factory. When we put out this report, we also published an interactive map so that folks can understand where are these factories around the US where vinyl chloride is produced and also where is it disposed of. I encourage you to check this out. You can go to our website, toxicfreefuture.org, and you can actually zoom in to see where these facilities are located, how many pounds of vinyl chloride and toxic waste do these companies produce, and also what are some of the socioeconomic facts because as I mentioned, this is a major issue of environmental justice. Most of these plants, I know this may not be so here in East Palestine, but in many cases, most of these plants in the US are located in low-income communities of color, again, making this a major issue of environmental justice and racism. More recently, just this past week, we put out a report to really try to understand, well, how much vinyl chloride is shipped by rail here in the United States? East Palestine disaster was awful, but what other communities are at risk from the regular rail shipment of vinyl chloride in communities here in the United States? And one of the things that really made us curious about that was that there was a similar derailment that took place 12 years prior in Paulsboro, New Jersey. Like in East Palestine, we saw a massive breach of vinyl chloride. In fact, the levels of vinyl chloride that were released in that incident were so high, based on air monitoring and air modeling, people in the community could have died in that incident. The levels were extremely high. Like in East Palestine, a ACE survey revealed that many community residents, as well as first responders, developed health problems that were consistent with exposure to vinyl chloride. This one company whose trains derailed was also oxyvinyls. And the thing that really got us interested to put out this report was that in both cases, in East Palestine and also in Paulsboro, New Jersey, 12 years prior, the vinyl chloride was being shipped from a chemical plant right outside of Houston, and it was on its way to a PVC production plant in Pedricktown, New Jersey. So both in East Palestine and in Paulsboro 12 years prior, the vinyl chloride was being shipped from the same plant, and it was going to the very same plant that you see pictured here. And that really made us want to understand, well, how much vinyl chloride is shipped around the US on an average, on an annual basis, and what communities may be at risk as a result. We were shocked. I've been working on toxics issues for more than 20 years. I worked with Steve at CHJ for 9 years. We found that at any given moment, oxyvinyl ships more than 200 train cars across the country. So right now, chances are there are about 200 rail cars that are traveling from their plants in Texas. They're on their way to New Jersey. They're traveling through hundreds of cities and towns, and in total, they have about 36 million pounds of vinyl chloride on the rails right now. Annually, when we crunch the numbers on an annual basis, the plastics industry ships approximately 1.5 billion pounds of vinyl chloride by rail to these factories. These factories are located in New Jersey, such as the one that I showed. There are actually 2 vinyl production plants in New Jersey. They're also shipped to factories in Illinois, as well as Niagara Falls, Canada. And this is just Oxy. We did not, in this report, look at other producers like Westlake Chemical, and stay tuned on that. But again, any given moment, 36 million pounds of vinyl chloride on the rail. Well, where does this travel? So looking at government reports, looking at railroad maps, looking at folks that are really nerdy about the railroad industry who take photos of rail cars, we were able to piece together and figure out what is the most likely route of where vinyl chloride is regularly shipped when it travels from their plant in New Jersey, from their plant in Texas to New Jersey. As you'll see here, this is a massive route. It's nearly 2,000 miles long. And that's a huge concern, especially because the vinyl chloride not only travels through smaller towns like East Palestine, but through some major metropolitan areas with literally millions of people in some of these cities. Places like Houston, Texas, Austin, Texas, San Antonio, Philadelphia, Little Rock, Toledo, Fort Wayne, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia. I know we're very close to Pittsburgh. So at any given moment, one of the things I didn't mention is that if we look at this, how many people live in close proximity to this rail route? So as I think many of you know by now, the federal government recommends that if there's an accident involving vinyl chloride, the federal government recommends at a minimum an initial 1-mile evacuation. So for people that live within a 1-mile radius, they should be evacuated if there's a vinyl chloride derailment involving fire like we saw in East Palestine last year. We looked at, well, how many people live within a mile of this train route? Across the country, we found that there are more than 3 million people that live within a mile radius of where vinyl chloride is regularly shipped across the year. Literally thousands of rail cars are traveling across the country over the year, putting an estimated 3 million people at risk. We also found at the same time, there's over 1,500 schools also within this 1 mile radius. Take a look at this. Here's a little bit of information that might be of interest to some of y'all locally. So as I mentioned, Pittsburgh is one of the places where vinyl chloride regularly is shipped through. We found that, we looked at the route, and we found that there are 22,000 people that live within a 1 mile radius of where vinyl chloride is shipped through Pittsburgh. And in fact, there's also 11 schools that are located within a 1 mile radius. Toledo, Ohio, there's over 11,000 people within a 1 mile radius. So if there's another disaster, particularly in one of these large metropolitan cities, think about how crazy the response would be. Here is Philadelphia, one of the places where vinyl chloride is regularly shipped through. There's 60,000 people that live within a 1 mile radius in this instance. 95% of those folks are people of color. In addition, there's about 18 public and private schools that are also in close proximity. So this is a huge issue. East Palestine was an awful disaster, one of the worst disasters in U.S. history, but it's going to happen again. It happened 12 years ago in Paulsboro, New Jersey. It happened last year. Every year, 1.5 billion pounds of vinyl chloride are on the rails. It's only a matter of time before this happens again. And that's why we need the US EPA to take action now. The good news is, as some of you know, last month the EPA announced for the first time in a generation that they're evaluating whether or not to regulate or restrict vinyl chloride under the Federal Toxic Substances Control Act. We've known about the dangers of vinyl chloride since the 1970s, and that's because workers in factories were getting sick. They were developing a rare form of liver cancer called our angiosarcoma of the liver. The workers, their fingers, the bones in their fingers were also crumbling. We've known for decades that this is a highly toxic chemical, it's dangerous to transport, and it's especially harmful on the communities and the workers where it's made, and it's a consumer safety issue as well, which is a whole other presentation. And finally, there's no safe way to dispose of it. The final slide that I wanted to note is, where do the rail cars go to? So as I mentioned, in East Palestine, the rail cars were on their way to this factory in New Jersey that you see here. You actually see the rail cars there. This is a factory located in Pedrotown, New Jersey. The number one use of vinyl chloride is in PVC. The number one use of PVC is in building materials, like vinyl siding, like vinyl flooring, pipes. This